Hey everyone, today we're going to be showing you how to replace your CV axles on your Honda Talon. We're going to do the front and the rear, and this is going to be a similar process for the 2-seaters and the 4-seaters, as well as the R and X models. Now, if you suspect you have a bad CV joint, maybe you hear a clicking sound when you have the wheel cranked all the way to one side or the other, listen and find out or try to pinpoint exactly which CV axle that is, or maybe you have torn boots or even a broken CV axle. If you have any of those things going on, we're going to show you how to get it taken care of. Let's go ahead and get started. For parts, we're upgrading to these Tusk Gladiator Extreme Duty CV axles. The reason for that is we've got bigger tires on our machine and we're going to be doing more aggressive off-road riding, and we don't want to be stuck out on the trail with a broken axle. So these are the perfect upgrade. They've got a bigger shaft diameter and more durable boots. They've got an 18-month warranty, so if you need to pick these up, you can find them on our website or just click the link in the description below. To get this done, we're going to be using some common hand tools. The first thing I want to point out is we've got a torque wrench. We also need to separate some ball joints. There's a couple ways to get that done. One common way that anybody can do this at home is with a ball peen hammer and a pry bar. If you don't want to mark up your powder coat on your A-arm, you can use a dead blow hammer instead, but there is a better way. So we're going to be using a ball joint separating tool. We're also going to be using combo wrenches, some sockets. So we've got 10, 14, 17, 19, and 30 millimeter sockets. I also have a 24 millimeter socket to go along with this tool. Other than that, we're using safety glasses, rubber gloves, rags. We've got some grease, contact cleaner, and some thread lock. Now, specifically, we are going to be using the medium strength, high temp thread lock. Now, specifically for the front axles, you want to make sure you have some diff oil on hand since some fluid will be lost during replacement. At the machine, you want to start by loosening your lug nuts, especially if you don't have an impact gun. Then we're going to raise the machine off the ground. We're using a UTV lift, but if you don't have one of these, use a jack and jack stand and just make sure you are safely supported. And then we can go ahead and remove the wheel. Next, we need to remove the cotter pin in our hub nut. Then we're going to use a 30 millimeter socket. I'm going to have someone hold the brakes, and I also have a pry bar to help keep this from rotating, and we'll break that nut loose and remove it. You can see this washer's stuck on there, so we're using a chisel and a hammer to remove it. Remove the guard on top with your 10 millimeter socket. Next, use your 17 millimeter socket to remove the top and bottom bolts from the caliper. Pull that out, and that's going to let you remove your hub. And then I don't want to let the caliper hang by the brake hose, so I'm going to temporarily reinstall it and just thread those bolts in by hand. Next, we need to release the lower ball joint from the lower A-arm, so we're going to use some needle nose pliers to remove that cotter pin. Then I've got my 19 millimeter wrench. I'm going to remove that bolt, and I'm actually going to thread it back on 2 or 3 threads, and that way when I take my pry bar, I can pry against the knuckle or in between the knuckle and the A-arm, and then I'm going to use my dead blow hammer to hit the side of the A-arm. And if you're worried about this getting marked up, you can use a rag to protect your A-arm where you pry it on it. Next up, we need to disconnect our tie rod end. So we've got a cotter pin on here. We got to take that out. Then I'm using my 14 millimeter socket to loosen that up. And then I'm just backing this nut up flush to the end of the ball joint right there. And we're going to show you a different method on this. We're actually using a ball joint separating tool. It's going to make the job easier. It's my preferred way to do this. So to use this tool, I'm going to put some grease on the threads, and then we just need to slide it in place so we're underneath the boot, and then this flat edge is going to press against that nut right there. It's going to want to sit on right there, and these can be really stubborn. That's why I like this tool. And if this is wiggling around too much on you, you can temporarily reinstall that lower A-arm on there. Now, before I remove that nut all the way, I'm going to loosen the lower shock mount. The next step is to prep your new CV axle, since that gear case, once we remove the old one, it has some oil in there that can come out. So You want to kind of move quick. Now the front axle is going to have this reluctor ring on there, and next to it where the seal rides on the shaft, we're going to put a little grease right there. Just a thin film. Wipe any extra off. And I'm going to flip the axle over. And actually, before I do that, I do want to point out, you've got this clip on the end. So when you install the shaft, I recommend having the open end of this clip facing straight up. And then when you slide this in, the splines are going to help this go into place. Now, if I flip this over to the other side, I'm going to remove the castle nut and the washer. We can bring this over to the machine. Next, I'm going to take a tie down strap and set one end of it on our hood mount support. And then the other end I'm going to put on the upper A-arm. And from here I can completely remove the nut from our tie rod end. Then we can remove the bolt from the lower shock mount. And we'll use the tie down to raise the A-arm up. And we're keeping a hand on the CV axle. Once you have this high enough, you can rotate the knuckle out. And then this next step, we're gonna go quick. I'm using the CV axle like a slide hammer. This one's a little stubborn, but you can see it just popped out by doing that. And then we have our other CV axle already prepped. The opening in the clip is facing up. You wanna line up the splines and use this as a slide hammer and pop it into place. After that, we can swing the knuckle onto the new CV axle. Then we can lower this down and install the lower shock mounting bolt into the A-arm. We'll thread that nut on. Then we'll take the tie rod in, set that into place. And when you do this, make sure the taper on the tie rod end and where it seats is completely clean and free of grease. We'll thread that nut on. Next, I'm going to clean off the lower ball joint and the taper on the A-arm. Then we'll line up the two pieces, push them together, and install the nut. Now to tighten all the hardware down, we're going to start with the lower shock mounting nut. Honda does recommend replacing this, but we're putting a little bit of Loctite on that and then torquing it to 58 foot-pounds. After that, we have our tie rod and nut. So 2019 to 2022, that's going to be 25 foot-pounds. 23 and newer, it's going to be 41 foot-pounds. And then we've got the lower ball joint nut. That's going to be 36 foot-pounds. And on the tie rod end and lower ball joint nut, don't forget to install the cotter pins. Now for the cotter pin, even though it didn't come this way from the factory, ideally it would sit down inside of this groove, and that's going to help protect it. From here, this knuckle is kind of greasy, so I'm going to wipe it down. I'm also going to wipe down the inside of this hub, get that old stuff out of there. We'll put some fresh grease on the splines, as well as this outside diameter where it sits in the wheel bearing. That's just keep things from seizing up. After that, you want to make sure you take a clean rag with some contact cleaner or brake cleaner and wipe down the rotor. Make sure there's absolutely no grease on it. Then we can remove the caliper again that we loosely installed. And then for the brake caliper, make sure the brake pads are spread apart. Set the hub in place, line it up with the splines on the axle. Slide that all the way in. And then for the brake caliper, we'll go ahead and slide that onto the disc. Now for the mounting bolts, I am using some high temp, medium strength thread lock on them. And then we'll torque it to 44 foot-pounds. Next, you want to install your axle washer, and I'm applying a little bit of thread lock to the axle nut. Thread that on, and then it's a good idea to have someone hold the brake, but I'm also using this breaker bar to support everything just in case, to keep things from slipping. We're going to torque this to 101 foot-pounds on our machine. That spec is for the 19 to 21 models. The 2022 is going to be 111 foot-pounds, and after 2022 is going to be 146. Then once you have that torqued, you need to make sure the castle nut lines up with the holes in the axle so you can install the cotter pin. If you're not quite aligned correctly like ours, you always want to slightly tighten the nut to the next available spot. We'll go ahead and install the cotter pin and bend the ends over. Next, set the disc brake cover in place. I'm applying a little bit of thread lock to that bolt, and I'm going to tighten it down to 9 foot-pounds. Now we can remove our tie-down strap, install the wheel, and torque the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds. For the back, we need to remove the rear wheel. After that, we need to remove the cotter pin for the axle nut. I'm going to have someone hold the brake. I'm also using this breaker bar and pry bar. We'll break that nut free with the 30mm socket, completely remove it. And you can see this washer is kind of stuck on there again. It does have some of that Loctite on there, but that broke free as well. We'll remove it. After that, we can loosen up our rear caliper bolts and remove them. We'll pull that out of the way and we can remove the hub. After that, I'm going to temporarily reinstall this caliper, and then we'll remove the radius rod nuts along with the rods. Now just be aware that some machines are going to have an additional A-arm right here. So if yours has that, make sure you get it disconnected. For us, we are ready to swing out the trailing arm and remove the axle. It's going to come out the same way that we did on the front. Just pull that out, use it as a slide hammer. With the axle out, we're going to clean up by that rear differential. We're also going to clean up that rear knuckle as well. Then we're going to take the new axle and we're going to apply some grease to these splines just to prevent any corrosion. Again, we have that open end of the clip facing up. That's going to prevent it from getting caught and popped off or out of its groove as we install it. Again, we're going to use that like a slide hammer. We've got the castle nut and washer that we're going to remove from the end. And I've got a little bit of grease on these splines as well. Then we can pull this around the back. We're going to slide this into the knuckle at the end of the trailing arm. You also want to wipe away some of this old grease from the hub and any grime that's on there. Now we can apply a little bit of new grease to the splines on the hub and just a very thin film on this outside edge where it sits inside the wheel bearings, again, just to prevent corrosion. And with all that done, I'm going to make sure there's absolutely no grease on the rotor. So I'm taking a clean rag with some contact cleaner or brake cleaner, and I'm going to wipe it down. Okay, so I'm pulling the caliper back out. Now we can slide the hub on. Make sure the brake pads are spread apart. And with that in place, I can go ahead and reinstall the caliper. And then we're going to install both caliper mounting bolts. And I'm applying a little bit of that high temp, medium strength thread lock on them. After that, we're going to set the radius rods in place. And we're also using that thread lock on the nuts as well. We're going to torque these two radius rod nuts to 58 foot-pounds. And then we're going to torque the caliper mounting bolts to 36 foot-pounds. Now that we've done that, we can go ahead and install our washer and castle nut I've got Loctite on the castle nut. I am torquing that to 101 foot-pounds. That's going to be for the 19 and 21 models. 22, you'll be 111. After 2022, you're going to be 146. With the castle nut lined up with that hole on the shaft, you can go ahead and install the cotter pin. Now we can reinstall our wheel. We're going to torque the lug nuts to 80 foot-pounds, and then you can go ahead and do those same steps for any remaining axles that you're doing. Now with everything back together, we need to make sure that our front differential is topped off on oil. So all we need to do is remove the side cap right in front of our CV axle. And with your machine on level ground, you want that oil level just to be parallel with those threads on the bottom. If the level is not at that point, you're going to want to add some until it is. So there you have it for the CV axle replacement on your Honda Talon. If you need the axles we used today or anything else for your machine, you can click the link in the description below. That's going to take you over to our website. We offer free shipping on orders over $75, so take advantage of that. And if you have any questions about the process, leave those in the comments. And don't forget, we have other helpful content available on these machines, so subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATVMC. Thanks for watching.